Today I'm going to talk to you about an actress, a performer, a writer, and a ventriloquist by the name of Shari Lewis, most famous for her sidekick creation, Lambchop, a sock puppet. Her career spanned about 40 years, and she started on the Captain Kangaroo show and became a beloved American icon. She had her own television. She had several of her own television programs, and she guest starred on many other television programs. And over the course of her career, she won 13 Emmys, which is pretty astronomical. Now, my nephew, Nick Paul, is a professional magician. You might remember him from a matchbook video I did, including the Magic Castle, where he performs quite regularly and all over the world. He's been on Netflix and a lot of the Penn and Teller show, Fool Us. And his father is actually a professional ventriloquist, and he performs also around the world. It's amazing to know people who are entertainers and actually make a living being entertainers. So Richard Paul is his name, and I had the opportunity to speak on the phone with Richard, and we went over sort of the history of ventriloquism and some of his favorite performers, including Shari Lewis. And it was an interesting interview. So if you want to hang out after the Shari Lewis bit, you'll hear my interview with Rick Paul. So stay tuned for that if you want to at the end of the Shari Lewis bit. So let's go. Let's talk about Shari Lewis, and we'll start with her Beverly Hills home.
That's Lambchop. Lambchop's a puppet. This is a finger puppet. But Lambchop was a sock puppet that was invented by a woman named Shari Lewis, who was a ventriloquist who had a few puppets, but the most famous being Lambchop.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, presenting my favorite supporting act, Miss Lamb. What are you shaking?
I am not your supporting act. Oh, she kills me.
What is so funny?
What is so funny, honey, is that I don't support you. You support me. These people don't want to see you. They want to see me. Oh, and the star. Da-da!
They gave these actually out at Shari Lewis's funeral. Shari Lewis lived in this Beverly Hills home for many, many years. Actually, she was living in this house when she died in, it was August 2nd of 1998.
Shari Lewis was born Sonia Phyllis Hurwitz in the Bronx on the 17th of January, 1933. As a child, she loved music, acrobatics, piano, and for some reason got into ventriloquism. And after a year of college, she opted to not pursue college and headed to New York, probably Greenwich Village, to be a performer. Now, in 1960, she appeared on the classic American television program morning kids show Captain Kangaroo, and America fell in love with Shari and her puppet, her most famous puppet, Lambchop. The puppet was a lamb, obviously, who was eternally 6 years old and described as lovable, sassy, and cranky, a sock puppet with eyelashes and a very distinct personality. Now, Shari herself got married to a guy named Stan Lewis and ended up divorcing him in 1957, but she kept the surname Lewis. Shortly afterwards, she met Jeffrey Tarcher, who was a book publisher, and they married a year later. And together, they had a daughter, Mallory, in 1963. Jeremy Tarcher founded the Tarcher Publishing House, which published books and memoirs by Johnny Carson, Phyllis Diller, Zsa Zsa Gabor, Buddy Hackett, and Joan Rivers, and other entertainers. Puppets and marionettes were a big deal in American entertainment, starting with probably the most famous, Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy. It's kind of funny that he became so successful as a ventriloquist on the radio. No one even saw Charlie McCarthy at that point, but he became an American icon on television. And another star was Buffalo Bob and his marionette Howdy Doody, who had the Howdy Doody show, which ended in 1960. That's when the Shari Lewis show debuted, introducing the world to her other puppets, like Hush Puppy, Charlie Horse, Wing Ding, and then, of course, her mainstay, Lambchop. Now, here's a fun bit of trivia. Together with her husband, Jeremy Tarcher, they co-wrote an episode of the original Star Trek series called The Lights of Zetar, and that aired in 1969. Shari also provided voices for animated cartoons like Honey Half-Witch and others, even including voices on the Banana Splits Adventure Hour. I think the entire fascination with ventriloquism is, well, first of all, people being mesmerized by a puppet who, seems to be animated and speaking on its own, but then isn't. And also concentrating on the performer itself, seeing if you can see them moving their lips. And some people are amazing that do singing impersonations while they're ventriloquizing, while they're performing. But it boils down to them being convincing. Now watch this clip of Shari Lewis and Lambchop. The exchange between her and the puppet was, to me, incredible. I can barely walk and talk at the same time, but check this out. I mean, she never breaks. She never skips. She is incredible.
Santa Fe, San Jose, Monterey, that's a big Grand Fork, Grand Falls, Grand Valley, Grand Ridge. It's a grand old flag, a great old lake, a great little dog, a big big Southland lands and dead and Blue Rock, Falling Up, Black Rock, Big Rock, Utah, Butte, Montana, Atlanta, Savannah, Sarasota, Minnesota, Hennessy, Tennessee, Colorado, Eldorado, Larimore, Hapsburg, Toluca, Hackensack, Fond du Lac, Mayopac, Cadillac, Saranac, Sandy Lake, Grand Lake, Devil Lake, Crater Lake, Beach Lake, Pomona, San Diego, Winnipeg, Kika, Winnemucca. Faster, faster, hey, I've been everywhere, and yes, I've been everywhere, and then cross the desert there, and then breathe that mountain air, and then travel, have my share, and then I've been everywhere, everywhere, I've been everywhere, oh yeah.
In 1984, Shari Lewis was diagnosed with breast cancer and was treated for that. And cancer returned in July of 1998 when she was diagnosed with uterine cancer. She had a hysterectomy at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center and then began chemotherapy. Now, towards the end of her life, Shari Lewis sold the rights to Lambchop to DreamWorks, now part of NBC Universal. Not the live performing rights, but the rights to television, films, and recordings, I'm sure. When she was recovering from her hysterectomy, she began chemotherapy, and while undergoing chemo, she developed viral pneumonia. Shari Lewis died on the evening of August 2nd, 1998. Her cause of death was pneumonia and metastatic endometrial stromal sarcoma, which is uterine cancer. She was 65 years old. Shari was cremated, and there was a private memorial service.
This is the memorial pamphlet from her funeral service, or her memorial service. But after Shari Lewis passed away, she was cremated. And her cremains were returned to her husband, who was living at that house. Jeremy Tarcher was his name. Don't know what happened to Shari Lewis's cremains. And now her husband is passed away as well.
Some of you may have picked up that I've re-uploaded this video just a few hours after I posted it. In a bizarre twist of timing, Mallory Lewis posted a video on TikTok that she's moving to Portugal. And she shows herself with the puppet Lambchop sitting on Shari's cremation urn and asking fans advice on what to do with her mother's cremains. She says in the video that Shari has been in her closet in a ratty pine box for the past 26 years. In the video, she says to Lambchop, "What do I do with my late mom's ashes?" This prompted Lambchop to question, "What are you talking about?" Mallory replied, "Well, you're sitting on Shari right now." The shocked sock puppet exclaimed, "Jesus." It's just a bizarre bit of timing, and you can see in the picture that Lambchop is indeed sitting on the pine box that contains Shari Lewis's cremains. I thought it was important enough to add to the video and re-upload it. Thanks.
But that was the longtime home of legendary comedian, ventriloquist Shari Lewis.
After Shari Lewis died, Mallory Lewis, who was the daughter of Shari, her only child, was inundated by well-wishers. A lot of them asked if Lambchop was gone, along with her mother Shari. And Mallory says, I couldn't let Lambchop die, so she continues to perform. She has the live performing rights to Lambchop and continues to perform, referring to herself as Lambchop's sister. Mallory is on TikTok at Your Fave Lambchop and on Instagram, Mallory Lewis and Lambchop. And that's also the name of their website, MalloryLewisandLambchop.com. They also do cameo videos. So rest in peace, Shari Lewis. We have the wonderful Puppet's legacy, and she left her mark on American television as a performer and just the world. Because I understand today, I just found out that she was a star in Britain as well. So she hit different shores as well. So rest in peace, Shari Lewis. Now, as I mentioned before at the beginning of the video, this is an interview I did with Richard Paul, a professional ventriloquist from the Michigan area, and he offered to help me out with some ventriloquism history questions and some of the most famous ventriloquist dolls and ventriloquist performers. So here is the conversation between myself and Richard Paul.
See you later, folks. Bye.
Okay. Okay, go home. But when we go home, am I going to give you a piece of my mind?
I wouldn't dream of taking your last piece.
So what prompted this, my getting in touch with you, is that I've been doing research currently on Shari Lewis. I've been watching a lot of her performances. And then I went down a little rabbit hole finding, other people that were ventriloquists, very successful, very well known. But then I got to thinking about back when I was a kid, and there was Boys Life magazine, and it was the fascination of throwing your voice, all those ads that were back there. And it was all such like talking out of tin cans or something. You put a butter container 10 feet away from you, and people think that you're going to be able to sound like you're talking out of the butter container or whatever. But I was curious how if you saw those ads or how you got kicked off into the career.
Well, I started. Paul Winchell turned me on. I saw him on the Ed Sullivan Show, and I was just fascinated with what he could do. And then I would see him on periodically on the Lucy Show. He'd be on there and a few other places, but when he was just on Ed Sullivan, and then there was Jimmy Nelson too on Ed Sullivan. Jimmy Nelson, he's smoking a cigarette, making a puppet talk, and it just totally blew me away. But I thought, how can you do that? How do you do that? And I ended up getting sick. I had rheumatic fever. I couldn't go to school, and so I'm watching, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood Puppets and watching all that, and watching the ventriloquism, and then the Sears catalog had Jerry Mahoney puppet from Jimmy Nelson, and it had the record that taught you how to do it. And my mom and dad got me that for Christmas. While I was homesick, I just taught myself how to be a ventriloquist. Then I started doing shows in my parents' garage. And
your American dream, a kid with the interest in pursuing it, and then being able to do it for a living. I mean, people don't think that's possible unless you show up on Ed Sullivan or something like that.
They'll come up to me and they'll say, you have another job, right? And I said, no, this is what I do.
Is there like a ventriloquist, I don't want to say union, but organization?
Yeah, there is. There's a couple of them. There's one Valentine Box put together out of Vegas. The Valentine Box has an awesome book. It's called I Can See Your Lips Moving, The History and Art of Ventriloquism by Valentine Box. Then there's another called Dummy Days. It's by Kelly Ashbury. And Kelly Ashbury, he directed Spirit. It's all the greats that I grew up with. It's in that book, and he was able to actually interview them all. In Shari Lewis's case, he interviewed her daughter because the daughter took over for her, because she ended up passing, and then she put together a nice documentary on her. And then, and now she's been doing some shows on cruise ships, doing basically her mom's show.
Yeah, it's very lovingly done and well done. With the Lambchop character is consistent, which is nice. Who have you met that that you really respect in the business?
I got to meet Paul Winchell in Vegas.
Wow.
He never up. The story behind him is, and you'll read about it if you read Ashbury's book, but he was extremely successful in the 50s. And he was doing movies, and he had his TV show, his weekly kids show on Saturday mornings, lunch boxes, you name it, everything that, that Edgar Bergen had and everything he had. because his inspiration was Edgar Bergen. You know, he was going to be a doctor, and he went into the movies, saw Edgar Bergen, and decided he didn't want to be a doctor anymore. He had been ventriloquist. He's successful. He's doing really well. He finds out his mother's not doing well in the hospital, goes to see her. Her last words before she passes is something like, you know, I'm not proud of you. You should have became a doctor or something like that. And then she dies. And so he gets, you know, the story goes, and whether it's true or not, the story goes, he went back to the studio and said, I quit. And he quits. And then he ends up becoming a doctor. And he ends up creating the first artificial heart pump. If you look it up, he created it.
I have. Actually, that was a piece of trivia I did know, but it's just, it's mind-blowing. I didn't know his medical background, but I did know that he came up with that, and that's fascinating. Wow. I mean, people don't realize that it's not just with your hand in a puppet. It is stand-up comedy. It's timing, as well as the art of trying to keep your head still and your mouth still, which is really hard. I mean, like someone like Edgar Bergen, who is, you know, highly revered, but I mean, he wasn't, you know, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but he wasn't very good, I didn't think. You know, when he spoke, he moved his head and moved his mouth, much like, you know, when Charlie McCarthy or whichever one he was using at the time. I don't know. How do you feel about him?
Well, he did radio in his early days. If you look at his early work, he's really good. Yeah. But he did radio, and he didn't have to, you know, even though he had the puppet with him and stuff. But in radio, they wanted to make sure they were getting his diction out and everything, because it didn't have the microphones we have today. But what is amazing about him, and something that we dissected at the ventriloquist convention many years ago, was how he could create characters, and those characters are well defined, and the humor and the performances he did always had a beginning, middle, and end. I've learned through him and through others that my characters have to be distinct, different from me, and different than, like, if I'm going to bring out my Bert Bosco and I bring out T.J., they better be totally different characters. They better be totally different voices, but, you know, especially different characters.
So Bergen is never really criticized. He's still held up in very, very high regard.
Yeah, he's high regard. You know, the only ones that, believe it or not, the only ones who criticize him are the non-ventriloquists. That'll say what you said. But we look at him as being like the stepping stone of what we all do now. I mean,
and so widely accepted. I mean, he was welcome to the White House, and Charlie McCarthy's footprints are at Grauman's Chinese Theater. Yep. I mean, that is.
And Candace Bergen says, you know, called him his little brother or older brother. I don't remember what it was, depending how old she was. You know,
it had to be really weird for her as probably the same size as Charlie McCarthy growing up. And the book Knock Wood, I think, is what it was that she wrote. And it would have been a challenge, I think, to have all that attention heaped on the puppet and vying for your father's attention. There's a lot of psychology there, though, most definitely, I think. There was also one or two episodes of, I don't know if it was the Edgar Bergen show, but of Charlie McCarthy actually walking, and that was like ultra bizarre. To see the movement. I was thinking about the movie Magic, the Anthony Hopkins movie, which is pretty terrifying, and that's one of the reasons I'm really fascinated by it, because it's sort of disconcerting in a way. Because once you're done, it sits in the corner, and you're just waiting. After being animated for so long, just kind of looking at it, sort of waiting for it to move again, and that's odd. Nick sent me that picture of, I don't know where he was, where there's a whole row of ventriloquist heads, the puppet heads.
That's called Vent Haven Museum, and that's in Kentucky there. It's all the old vaudevillian ones are in there. You'll see one of the Charlies is in there, and then now you've got Lucas, you got
wow. That's fascinating. I didn't know this until probably about 10 or so years ago. There's the movie magic was based on a British movie, and that was made in '64. And I had no idea when I knew her, but my little friend Sadie, who was one of the Transylvanians in the Rocky Horror Picture Show, she was a little person who was Hugo the Dummy in Devil Doll '64. It was very crude, you know. It was a paper mache head, and it was just kind of lumbered around. It's like, I just love this stuff because I've always been a fan of like sideshows and things like that. What as a kid disturbed me greatly. As an adult, I appreciate the art form, but it's still something that kind of goes, sometimes. The hardest thing has got to be, I think, the head movement. That's my thought. As your puppet is speaking, to not move your head as you would naturally. That would be really difficult.
Oh, you mean like the ventriloquist looking at the puppet, or the puppet itself moving his head?
No, I mean the ventriloquist, as I'll say the term, throwing his voice. When he's saying, I think you're silly, it would be really hard to not move your head as you're saying, I think you're silly. And that would be, I think, the hardest thing to do. I watched Edgar Bergen, and I liked Edgar Bergen. Don't get me wrong. I'm not on a tear about him at all. But I do, when I watch him, I go, he's groundbreaking. But I struggle with, being convinced by it.
Well, Charlie, are you having a good time? Well, whatever you say, it's up to you. You got your hand up my back. All right. Well, I would say that you're having a pretty good time. Well, that's very good, Bergen. Thank you. Yeah. Well, I'm certainly welcome, I guess. Yeah.
But part of it is that Charlie McCarthy is such a captivating character that you can't help but look like there is an exchange. You're watching. Your eyes go to Charlie as Edgar Bergen speaking. But if you stay on Edgar, that's where that's why I watch. But then I sound like I'm being nasty about him. I don't mean that way in a way at all.
You were saying the same thing a lot of people say. I thought too in the beginning, my God, he's moving his lips, but like you just said, you got so captivated with any one of the characters he had up, But then you go see somebody like Paul Winchell and you watch how he does it, and you could stare at him, and the only thing you can see moving is his throat movement, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
His Adam's apple's moving around, but that's it. But the puppets are so strong characters, you're not gonna even watch that either.
Well, then go in the other room and do your homework. I ain't got it. Well, Knucklehead has got it. I'll go right over to Knucklehead's house right now, and I'll get your homework.
But Knucklehead ain't home right now. He's working over at his uncle's restaurant.
Hi, Knucklehead. Oh, hello there, Mr. Winkle. What can I do for you? Well, may I borrow Jerry's homework assignment for today?
Oh, certainly. I got it right here, sir.
Thank you.
Here it is, right here.
Oh. I've always really enjoyed Shari Lewis, and I did a little bit of a dive in the last few days of watching her stuff, and there are some pretty spectacular things that when she in dueling with Lambchop, yes I will, no I won't, yes I will, no I won't, and it's that fast, and watching her go that way is fascinating.
Yeah, she was really, really good. And then again, they'll go back to that manipulation of that puppet, the way she made that little Lambchop, the way she moved it with her hands and everything. She basically took that hand puppet, you took the eyes in your hand, and took it to a whole nother level with basically a glorified sock puppet,
With eyelashes, yeah.
Yeah, she was phenomenal. And her ventriloquism was really outstanding too. Camera right on her, and no head movement, nothing. She was really, really good, and she was very creative and funny. Yeah.
Did you know that Don Knotts was a ventriloquist?
Yeah, and Johnny Carson was too.
Was he? That's fascinating.
Yeah, he was.
I didn't know.
He started off ventriloquist, then he veered off into magic, and then he started doing comedy. And yeah, he was a ventriloquist, and he would. If Jay Leno wouldn't have ventriloquist on, but he would. And then David Letterman one time did and you could probably find it, you probably already know this, he did like a week of, I want to say a week of ventriloquism he did. And he had every ventriloquist, whether they be known or not known, on there, and it was kind of cool. There was a cool.
That sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
Now you have your character. There's TJ, and your bird.
Yeah, he's Bosco Bird.
And how did you come up with those two?
Well, Bosco, I was doing puppet shows, created the character with Bosco throughout the puppet show, and then when I retired as a puppeteer and wanted to just go straight ventriloquism, I found a puppet person to make me a small little Bosco Bird, and then he became my character. And then I was talking to somebody who said, if you want to do some more video work or something like that, you should make Bosco bigger. And I found a real great puppet maker, and she made him bigger. And when she made him bigger, I was able to create his character bigger than what he was. And so he's been with me for a long, long time. And every time I work with him, I'll add something new to it, TJ is a character that was made by Tim Selberg, and he carved these things, there was a hand-carved thing. And I met him at the ventriloquist convention, and I found this puppet, and I held on to it. I thought, this is it, I ended up calling him TJ, and it's kind of like a little quirky side of me, I guess, as a kid. And I actually use him more for my senior citizen adult shows than I do for kids, because he goes over really well with that and the script I've written for him. But yeah, he's I'm writing now.
Also, it's not like you open up a magazine and flick through it and go, I want that one. It's definitely got to be an extension of your comedy, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, it has to be an extension.
Where were you? I was looking for you. I was in the woods. What were you doing in the woods? I was looking for my roots. See the hand? Solid oak. See the head? Solid oak. See this? Solid oak? Cedar chest. I saw my sister. You saw your sister? Yeah. And tell the kids how your sister's doing. She's mean and nasty. Why would you say she's mean and nasty? She's a Crabtree. Barbie's a doll. Yeah. She isn't real. Yeah. You can't hold a conversation with a doll that isn't real. You're talking to me?
Yeah, I actually bought some puppets that, matter of fact, I'm going to put up for sale that I had, and I thought I could do some with them, and it just doesn't click. It's like you go out with a person you go on a date with, and you don't click. And you go, well, this ain't working. And it's okay.
Oh my God, I got to ask now. Is there like a fetish with ventriloquist dolls? I have to ask.
Not that I know of, not for me, but I know
there has to be. There has to be. Wow. So now, how do people find your information and see clips of your work?
I go by funnypuppetguy.com, and I've got some videos up there, and then also on YouTube too. I got people to find me. Yeah, they'll find me online. Most of my work comes out from online, or somebody has seen me and they recommend me, which is the best way to do it, because then they know who I am. And
funnypuppetguy.com. Well, I appreciate you taking time to talk. It's been really an education, and I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
You heard me.